You're tuned into the Spot-Up Pod, the official podcast of the Spot-Up Shot newsletter. I'm your host, Paul Garcia. In today's episode, the Spurs went 3-1 in their last 4 games where they played 2 of the best teams in the Eastern Conference. Diving into the Spurs through 60 games of the season. And finally, Mason Plumlee has signed for the remainder of the season with San Antonio. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Spot-Up Pod. We have 4 games to go through from this past week with the Spurs, where they went 3-1. So let's go all the way back to last Monday. The Spurs were on the road against the Detroit Pistons, who were the best team and are the best team by record in the Eastern Conference. The Pistons were favored by 1.5 points. The Spurs had their full 10-man rotation available for this game. Detroit was missing a key player in Isaiah Stewart, who was serving his 7-game suspension from a fight that broke out with the Charlotte Hornets before the All-Star break. This was what we expected, a close matchup between 2 elite teams in basketball for most of the game, but then the Spurs were the ones who took control in the fourth quarter, starting off with a 7-0 run that put them ahead by 15 points. And then from there, the Pistons never got the game within crunch time, and so the Spurs won pretty comfortably against, again, one of the best teams out east by 11 points. The top 3 Spurs in this game were Devin Vassell, who goes off for 28 points and 4 assists. He went 7 of 11 from 3. Victor Wembanyama ends up with 21 points, 17 rebounds, 4 assists, and 6 blocks against the Pistons. And then Julian Champagnie also had a good game from 3 with 17 points and 6 rebounds, going 5 of 8 from three-point land. Now, even though he wasn't one of the top 3 Spurs by statistical, metrics, I guess you would say, I do want to note Stephon Castle's defense, defending Cade Cunningham, the go-to player for the Pistons, where Cade really had a tough time getting away from Castle, where Cade finished with 16 points on 5 of 26 shooting. Again, Castle's defense was very notable. And just one quick thought after this, watching this initial matchup is that, I don't really know how far Detroit can get in the Eastern Conference, once the playoffs come, more so because of their offense, where they're just so dependent on Cade Cunningham to have to create for himself and others. And that's one thing that they really struggled with, is that having that secondary creator. Of course, I think their defense is elite. They showed that, defending the Spurs pretty well in this game. But I just think that overall, when it comes to advancing further in the playoffs, it's really going to hamper them how much they rely on Cade and don't really have a secondary creator, going into the playoffs. All right, next up, let's go to Wednesday. The Spurs are still on the rodeo road trip. They're in Toronto to play the Raptors for the second time this season. The Spurs were favored by 5.5. Both teams had their full, core rotations available. And so this was a close game basically throughout. Then in the third quarter, Toronto took control, going on a 25-11 run where they went up by as many as 15 points, and they went into the fourth quarter with a 12-point lead. Then in the fourth, it's where the Spurs made their comeback. They started off with a 28-10 run to begin the quarter, and basically San Antonio won those crunch time minutes, and they held on for a very close 3-point win. The Spurs' top 3 players were, again, Devin Vassell, 21 points, 5 rebounds, went 5 of 6 from three-point land. Dylan Harper, the rookie, had a good game with 15 points off the bench, 5 rebounds, and 7 assists. And he actually got some crunch time minutes over Stephon Castle in this game. And then Julian Champagnie with 10 points, 6 rebounds, and 5 assists. He went 3 of 7 from three-point land. Victor Wembanyama did have a tough night offensively against the Raptors, but he did have 5 blocks on defense, and he noted how he was more fatigued coming out of All-Star break, and then with the shifting time zones from going to West Coast to East Coast, and how that was kind of hampering him both in that game against Toronto, and then also that followed suit the next night against the Brooklyn Nets. But one thing I want to mention about the Spurs making that 15-point comeback is that this is now the 6th 15-point comeback the Spurs have made this season, where they are now 6-9 when falling behind by 15 points this year. So again, it's been 6 games now where they've come back from a 15-point deficit. All right, so then after defeating Toronto, the Spurs are on the second night of a back-to-back in Brooklyn on Thursday evening. So the Spurs were heavily favored by 10.5 points against the Nets. Both teams had most of their core rotations available, and basically this turned out, what we thought what would happen on paper. The Spurs took control pretty early, leading by double digits, and they held a double-digit lead for most of the game. They ended up leading by as many as 26 points in this game, and basically the reserves closed out the game there in the fourth quarter, and the Spurs won by 16. So basically, this was one of those games where the Spurs went in and just took care of business against a bad team that's struggling. Julian Champagnie had the best game for the Spurs with 26 points, went 6 of 9 from 3, back home in the New York area, Brooklyn. De'Aaron Fox had a pretty good game with 14 points and 6 assists in limited minutes. And then Devin Vassell had another good game with 14 points, 7 rebounds, and 5 assists. He also went 4 of 7 from three-point land. All right, so now let's go to the most recent game for the Spurs, which was their first loss in a very long time. So on Sunday, the Spurs are on the road in New York to play the Knicks in an afternoon game. This was now, the third meeting between these two teams because if we recall, in mid-December, they met for the NBA Cup championship, which did not count for the standings of either team. And then, of course, the Spurs met the Knicks on New Year's Eve, where the Spurs made a 19-point comeback to narrowly defeat the Knicks there in San Antonio back on New Year's Eve. So the Spurs were favored by 1.5 this time, even on the road in New York. Both teams did have their core rotations available, which meant that Josh Hart was present, and so was Mitchell Robinson, because I believe that those two players did miss that December matchup on December 31st between the two teams. And also the Spurs were coming off some rest finally. They had 2 days of rest before entering this game. So the Spurs started off well. They were up 19-7 to open the game, with an early 12-point lead, but then the Knicks came back with their bench, really fueling their run, where the Knicks came back and responded with a 15-2 run to end the first quarter, and so New York led by 1 by the end of the first. And then from that point on, it was really New York who took control. They led by double digits for most of the remainder of the game. There would be segments where the Spurs would get within 8 points, within 9 points, but they could just never really, get close to the Knicks. And so New York, again, held that double-digit lead for most of the rest of the game. And then really in the fourth, they completely blew the game open, leading by as many as 26 points, where, basically it was over pretty early with like 4 or 5 minutes left. Both teams pulled their core players, and the reserves closed out the games, where the Knicks won by 25, handing the Spurs their worst loss of the season in terms of, scoring margin. The Spurs, again, that was their largest loss of the season by 25 points. The top 3 players for the Spurs in this game were Victor Wembanyama with 25 points, 13 rebounds, 4 blocks, but he did have 7 turnovers. Devin Vassell finishes up with 18 points and 7 rebounds. And he got more of his scoring both from 3, but also some of his mid-range kind of shot making. And then Stephon Castle ends up with 13 points, 4 rebounds, and 4 assists in this game. Regarding the 4 All-Stars that were present in this game, the Spurs have Wemby and De'Aaron Fox. The Knicks had Jalen Brunson and Cat Karl Anthony Towns. Wemby, Brunson, Cat all had their own impact on the game, whereas De'Aaron Fox was that lone All-Star who really struggled in this game. Fox finished with just 7 points on 3 of 10 shooting, going 1 of 6 from three-point range. And this kind of follows the reason why it's a little bit more concerning with Fox having this bad game against the Knicks is that this is something that I looked into this past week, was that Fox's numbers really decline when scoring the basketball, and specifically from shooting from outside, whenever the Spurs play a really good team, a team that's 600 or better. I looked at the numbers of each Spurs player, how they perform against these top teams, and this is something I noticed, was that Fox's scoring goes down, his efficiency goes down in shooting the basketball, and specifically his 3-point accuracy really takes a hit, considering he's still putting up the same volume in threes. And so again, that's pretty worrisome, because again, this wasn't just a one-off type of game where it was just a one-night kind of thing against New York. This has happened against some of the better teams in the league for Fox. And of course, we know that this level of team like the Knicks, these are the really good teams that the Spurs are going to play in the playoffs. And so that's something to watch, is how are they going to get Fox to be that player who's more efficient, who's scoring a little bit more against these better teams, when that's what the Spurs need from him. And it's kind of tough, because as we look at what's happened with Fox this season, is I know he was an all-star, but we look at his usage. He's actually 3rd on the team in usage. So obviously we know Wemby's the go-to player for the Spurs. Everything revolves around him. But then second, as the season has progressed, Stephon Castle now has a higher usage than Fox. And so that's one thing we see a lot in a lot of offensive possessions for the Spurs, is Castle usually being the point guard, bringing the ball up, getting the team into their actions, and Fox is more so in the corner and then kind of operating at a secondary action. And so that's something I'm kind of wondering, as the Spurs get ready to head off to the playoffs here in about 20 games, is, how does Fox make that shift from being that third playmaker to now becoming the second playmaker, and becoming more that scoring first version of Fox that we know he can be, as we saw him do in December whenever Victor Wembanyama was out? Can he make that shift in the playoffs, or is this something a little bit more worrisome, that they might not be able to get that more aggressive scoring type of player in Fox, with him sharing the court alongside Stephon Castle, who's more the lead ball handler whenever the two of them are out there? And if they do make that shift of making Fox run a lot more of the offense, and being more so that score first version kind of player, well, then what happens with Castle? Because obviously we know that 3-point shooting is his liability, and that's going to allow those teams, if Castle's off the ball, to now kind of cramp the space inside and really, back off Castle and just dare him to shoot. And so again, that's just kind of something to watch. Again, is that there is a trend going on where the Spurs play these better teams, and you do see Fox's numbers, do start to fall a little bit more. I will also say the same for Castle, where his scoring numbers do fall as well against these good teams. But again, for Fox, that's one thing the Spurs are needing from him, is against these really good teams when playoff time comes, is to step up and be one of those go-to scorers alongside Wemby. And so can he do that as the season has shown so far that he hasn't been able to do against these top level teams? Before I stop discussing the Knicks, I just want to also mention how the Knicks have been a difficult matchup for the Spurs this season. So again, if we count the NBA Cup championship, the Spurs are 1-2 against the Knicks this season. And that one win by the Spurs on December 31st, New Year's Eve, the Knicks were actually the better team for most of that game. Again, the Spurs had to make a 19-point comeback in order to narrowly win. So again, if we look at all the quarters, in these games and kind of just the trends, the storylines, the Knicks have been the better team in this matchup so far. Again, through just 3 games. And so I think one thing that really sticks out to me is just the extra possessions the Knicks are able to get, whether that's the Spurs turning the ball over, giving the Knicks extra possessions, or whether it's the Knicks crashing the offensive glass with Karl Anthony Towns having a mismatch against smaller Spurs players, Josh Hart being a really good offensive rebound for a guard, Mitchell Robinson, when he comes off the bench, he's just able to get a bunch of offensive rebounds. And then, of course, they have bigger wings out there like OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges as well. And so that's also something to watch, is just kind of the matchups the Spurs have out there. Of course, they want Wemby to be dominant defensively. So what they do is they usually have him on the non-shooters like Josh Hart. But then, sometimes that takes him away from the rim, or he's not there for those extra, to get those rebounds. And so that's where we saw that Cat in this game on Sunday really did have an advantage. So again, these teams would only see each other unless they made it all the way to the finals. But again, it's just something to watch, is that the Knicks haven't been a good matchup so far in this regular season for San Antonio. And so looking back at my projections for this past week, my predictions, should I say, I did think the Spurs would go 3-1 this past week. So did Vegas, though me and Vegas thought that they would lose to Detroit, but instead they ended up losing to the Knicks. So where are the Spurs now versus 600 and above teams, some of those top teams in the league? They are now 14-8 in the regular season. If we count the NBA Cup championship, they are now 14-9 against these top level teams. All right, let's move on to our second topic. So by playing in that game against the Knicks on Sunday, the Spurs did complete their 60th game of the season. So I just kind of want to go through, just look at the whole picture of where the Spurs are through 60 games. They are, of course, 43-17, a very good record, second best out west. In their last 10 games, they went 9-1. Of course, part of that was that 11-game winning streak they were on. And then also that part of that was also the undefeated February they went through, going 11-0. So their strengths on offense still kind of stay the same. They're 8th overall in offense as of Monday afternoon. They really stand out being top 10 in scoring, whether it's per game scoring or per 100 possessions. Really good transition team, getting out of the fast break and scoring. They are able to get to the free throw line, really good about drawing fouls from the opposing team. And they're also pretty good in taking care of the ball, not turning it over too much, even though that was a big issue against the Knicks. They're also pretty good when looking at scoring locations, at scoring near the rim, and also their mid-range accuracy is pretty good, top 10 level. As far as the weaknesses, not too many, initially, just really wide open three-point accuracy. They are ranked 24th right now through 60 games. Some things, though, that do worry me for the playoffs come playoff time on offense is still the Spurs' outside shooting. It's still one of my big concerns for their team. They are 17th in three-point makes as of 60 games. They're 20th in three-point accuracy. And so that's just my big question is, what are they going to do in the playoffs when teams, scheme defensively to try to limit them in the paint and also limit them from getting to the foul line, as we saw the Pistons, the Raptors, and the Knicks did this past week, and those are all very good defenses. And again, that's what defense, they're going to play better defenses in the playoffs, and these teams are going to scheme. That's their one main goal, is to try to take away the paint and take away the free throw line from the Spurs. And that's my question is, how did the Spurs counter? And we saw that against Detroit and Toronto. It was Devin Vassell and Champagnie. They went crazy from three, and they were the counters. They got more three-point attempts. They were ready. They were ready. They were open in the corners, and they hit a lot more three-pointers. But against the Knicks, they did have more trouble in this game. And of course, those are their two most reliable three-point shooters. Everyone else on the roster really struggles from three. And so again, that's my biggest concern, is the shooting once playoff time does come regarding the offense. Looking at the Spurs, their strengths on defense, of course, they are an elite defense, a top-level defense. They're third right now overall this season through 60 games on defense. They're really elite in limiting opponent scoring, whether it's per game scoring or per 100 possessions. They're really good in limiting effective field goal percentage from the opponent. That's 2-point scoring mixed in with 3-point scoring, or shooting, should I say. They don't let the opponents get to the foul line much. They don't let the opponents get offensive rebounds much, or second chance points, though against certain matchups that can be an issue. They're also really good in blocks per game. Of course, that helps having Wemby there to collect a bunch of blocks per game. And then also defensive rebounds, the Spurs are elite. And then regarding scoring locations, the Spurs do a really good job their defense with both Victor and Luke Cornett, being there for most of the 48 minutes of limiting opponent scoring near the rim, and also opponent floater range accuracy. As far as the weaknesses on defense, where they're bottom 10, it's more so I'd say a product of their system. So they're bottom 10 in opponent turnover percentage and also steals per game. And so again, this could just be the Spurs being more cautious defensively, of not wanting to gamble for steals and trying to get into passing lanes and kind of staying with their man instead. And then if that player gets by them and gets to the paint, well, then Wemby's there to clean things up, and also Luke Cornett. So again, I think that's more so part of their system, why they're so low in opponent turnover percentage and steals. Some areas though that do worry me on defense, is still the opponent offensive rebounding. Again, I know that the Spurs are second here. They're very elite on a night-to-night basis, but against certain teams with bigger lineups, like someone like New York, how they showed, that can be a concern. And also opponent second chance point scoring can be a concern. But again, I think that really is going to depend on, in the playoffs, who the Spurs draw in their matchups. So overall on defense, again, I'm not as concerned at all. I think that the Spurs' defense is going to carry over very well into the playoffs, and it's going to be their one constant they're going to have in the playoff, is that they could always bank on their defense to remain elite, to make it really tough for the opposing offense to score on a night-to-night basis. I think that how far the Spurs end up going in the postseason is really going to be determined by their offense. What limitations does their offense have? And I think that's going to be where, if we do see the Spurs, not go as far as maybe their expectations show, it's going to be due to their offense. All right, let's look at the math game for the Spurs through 60 games. So they are still winning 2s, 3s, and the free throw line this season. Their biggest advantage is the free throw line, where they're outscoring teams by 199 points from the foul line. Their next biggest advantage is the 2-point scoring, whether that's paint and mid-range. They're outscoring teams by 142 points. And then they're barely winning the 3-point line by 30 points, which is just basically making 10 more threes than their opponents. So again, of course, the area to watch there is that 3-point scoring in terms of the math game. All right, for our third topic, let's go through some news and notes. So on Friday last week, the Spurs did sign veteran big man Mason Plumlee for the rest of the season. So we know that Plumlee was initially on a 10-day contract, but instead of signing Plumlee to another 10-day, as they could have done, the Spurs just went ahead and signed him for the rest of the season. Again, Plumlee does take the Spurs' last open roster spot after the team had waived Jeremy Sohan a few weeks ago. And of course, Sohan is now with the Knicks. And so Plumlee will be on the team for the rest of the season. Then he's going to be joining unrestricted free agency, joining Harrison Barnes, Kelly Olynyk, Bismack Biyombo, Jordan McLaughlin, and Lindy Waters III. All those players will be unrestricted free agents come June 30th this coming summer. Now, we obviously haven't seen Plumlee play in a game yet, because he's still recovering from a groin surgery that he underwent when he was with the Charlotte Hornets in late December. So the Spurs continue to list him as out due to return to competition reconditioning so far since he's been signed to their team, and he will be out on Tuesday against the Philadelphia 76ers. But even when he is healthy, as I mentioned here on the pod and written about as well, again, I don't think Plumlee will play a lot for the Spurs. He'll more so be there in case Wemby or Luke Cornett get into foul trouble in a game, or if they have to miss some time out on the court, then I could see Plumlee coming in as the backup center there. And again, the team just needs a taller option defensively whenever Wemby or Cornett are both out, because Kelly Olynyk hasn't been able to get the job done, nor has Bismack Biyombo, the other two center options on the team. And so I've shown the numbers before how the Spurs' defense just completely falls apart if either Wemby or Cornett are not on the floor. And then on Monday, I really thought that the NBA would have announced the February monthly awards, but they didn't. So I think that those awards are coming, this week, whether that's Tuesday or a little bit further after that. So I wrote a piece this past week looking at how well the Spurs did in February, where they went undefeated 11-0. And so I do think that they have multiple candidates who could win a bunch of awards in February. So I think that Coach Johnson should be getting the Western Conference Coach of the Month in February, because he guided the Spurs to the only undefeated record, amongst all 30 NBA NBA teams in that month of February, with the Spurs going 11-0 and really, dominating a lot of the teams that they played. So for Coach Johnson, if he wins the award, this will be his second time winning the award this season. I think that he won it back in December. I also think that Wemby has a good shot at winning both the Western Conference Player of the Month, both for the stats he put up on offense and defense, and then also for the Defensive Player of the Month out west because of the stats that he put up over on defense, and how the Spurs had the third best defense during the month of February. So again, I think Wemby has a shot at both awards, both Player of the Month and Defender of the Month in February. And then rookie Dylan Harper has a good shot to win his first West Rookie of the Month, both by the scoring production and assist numbers he put up in the month of February, and because the usual winner, which is Cooper Flagg, he only played in 4 games during February. So again, Harper played in most of the games during February, had good stats. So again, I think that Harper might be a good candidate to win the February West Rookie of the Month. And so again, we'll see if Wemby, Coach Johnson, and Harper end up winning those awards this coming week whenever the awards get announced. All right, so now before I close up this episode, let's look ahead to the Spurs' next 5 games. So again, I probably won't be recording another episode until the next 5 games have passed. So I first want to look at how the Spurs are doing in their last 10 games. They are 9-1 in their last 10, scoring. They are offensively, they have the second best offense during the stretch and 5th best defense. So on Tuesday, they're on the road in Philadelphia to play the 76ers for the first time this season. The Sixers are struggling right now. They're 4-6 in their last 10. They have the 20th ranked offense and 21st ranked defense during the stretch. They will be without Joel Embiid and Paul George. So I'd still think that the Spurs will win this game, on the road in Philly. So I'm taking that as a win for the Spurs. I am eager to see how Stephon Castle matches up with defending Tyrese Maxey, and then also, who's out there guarding VJ Edgecombe for Philly. On Thursday, the Spurs return home after the rodeo road trip has been concluded, where they're going to host the Detroit Pistons, who they just played, a week ago. The Pistons are playing very good basketball in the last 10. They are 8-2 in their last 10. They have the 7th ranked offense during the stretch and best defense in the league during the stretch, 1st ranked defense. Now, Isaiah Stewart should be back for this game. His league suspension will have concluded by this point. And again, I think it's going to come down to how much the Spurs can do a little bit more on offense compared to the Pistons. So I'm going to go ahead and take the Spurs in this game. So I think the Spurs win this game. Then on Friday, on the second night of a back-to-back, the Spurs are going to host the Los Angeles Clippers. The Clippers are playing 500 basketball in the last 10. They're 5-5, 21st ranked offense and 15th ranked defense during the stretch. There's a chance Darius Garland could be available for the Clippers. I'm also very interested to see who the Spurs have guard Kawhi Leonard, whether it's Stephon Castle or maybe Julian Champagnie or Harrison Barnes. Just looking to see who guards Kawhi in this game. But again, I think this is a game where the Spurs could drop it just because it's the second night of a back-to-back after playing a really good Pistons team the night before. But because Vegas is going to favor the Spurs in this game, most likely, I'm going to go ahead and say that the Spurs win. Though, again, a loss wouldn't shock me considering it's the second night of a back-to-back. So, again, I'll still take the Spurs in this game. Then on Sunday, the Spurs are still at home. They're hosting the Houston Rockets. The Rockets are 6-4 in their last 10. They have the 15th ranked offense during the stretch and 7th ranked defense. Again, I like what I've seen the Spurs do against the Rockets so far this season. And plus it's in San Antonio, so I will continue to take the Spurs over the Rockets. And then on Tuesday, March 10th, the Spurs are going to host the Boston Celtics. The Celtics are playing good basketball as well, 8-2 in their last 10, 4th ranked offense and 3rd ranked defense during the stretch. There is a chance, who knows, every game, you just never know when Jason Tatum might make his return. So, there's a chance maybe Tatum's back by this point. And because, I don't want to say the Spurs go 5-0, I'm going to go ahead and say just for what they've done on in their last 10, the Celtics, I'm going to go ahead and say that the Celtics win this game. So again, I have the Spurs going 4-1 is my prediction. I think Vegas is going to say the Spurs should go 5-0. At best, I think the Spurs can go 5-0 against this really tough slate of games. But at worst, I could also see 1-4 being the result because of just the competition they're playing. They're not really playing any games this coming week where there's any guaranteed wins. These are all teams that I think could beat San Antonio if anything goes wrong for the Spurs on that individual night. So again, I'm going to go ahead and say 4-1, but 5-0 or 1-4, would not be out of the question.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of Spot Up Pod. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a rating on your favorite podcast apps and our YouTube channel. The Spot Up Pod is recorded and produced by Paul Garcia. The music for this episode was written by Vincent Garcia and Paul Garcia. Thank you for listening and have a great day.